Hello everyone, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Tudor Talk, where our special guest, of course, is Nikki Clarke, who's going to be talking to us about those indomitable, irrepressible Howard women. What fascinating characters. I'm so glad that you're going to be able to join me and us today. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah and I'm the Tudor Travel Guide, and this is our monthly Tudor chat. And while we wait for some people to arrive, do say hello. I can see that some of you are coming through already. Make sure that you give me the thumbs up or even a heart to let me know that you're here, and maybe you want to tell me where you are in the world and what you've been up to today. We've got a rather, if you're in Europe and if you're interested in football, there's a rather big football match going on this evening. So I'm not sure how many people we're going to get live, but of course, welcome to any of those of you who are making it live. And of course, those of you who will catch up on follow-up. This will be available on YouTube ad infinitum. So yeah, let's see who's in the house today. Hello, Janet. Lovely to hear from you. So sunny Niagara in Canada. I just find this amazing that people can just pitch in from all over the world. Hello, Buttons H Buttons. Yes. Tell me again. Is it? What your I know we know each other. So tell me your name. And you're Blacksburg, Virginia. Yeah, right. Is that right? Maybe I've got that wrong. Tell me. And Gail, hello Gail. Lovely to see you. Just made it home. Well, I'm so delighted that you can join us. Six Wives, hello. And we've got Lorraine, a new member. Hi Lorraine and welcome. Where are you in the world, Lorraine? Let me know. And Barb, lovely to see you. Robin and, oh, Barb, you've said you're also from Canada. So you guys in Canada have got a heat wave going on, right? Can you just send a bit of it over here? It's very humid, but not a lot of sun at the moment. Anyway, good. So let's just do a little bit of housekeeping before we get into today's chat. I just wanted to mention, for those of you who don't know what this is, and some of you may be tuning in for the first time, this is my QR code for Instagram. And if you want to follow me on my on-location trips as I travel around, the best place to do that is on Instagram. So do make sure that you're a member. If you want a quick way of logging in, you can just focus the camera of your phone on the QR code, and that should recognize the code and take you directly to my homepage. Please do subscribe. Or you can just do it the normal old-fashioned way, and that's just look up Instagram and find me at the Tudor Travel Guide. But yes, do join me there. Okay, now today we are going to be talking for about 1 hour as usual, and up to 1 hour. I've got lots of questions I want to ask Nikki, but I hope that you're going to ask some of your own. I'm going to keep an eye on the live chat, and I will try and ask as many as we can within the hour. Good, right. So I think with that, let me just check if anybody. Oh yes, we've had a few more people arrive. We've had Jackie from Perth in Australia, and Leslie from Oklahoma, Jackie, yeah, and Rebecca from Mississippi, and Alia from Argentina. Hello again, and also Mamalax, that's right. I think you've been here before, haven't you? I remember. From East Woodstock, Connecticut. My real name is Marsha. Thank you for that, Marsha. And Barb, you were just saying heat waves in part of the country. Yes, okay. We've just finished a spell of 30 degrees centigrade. Whew, that's hot. Okay, lovely. Oh, and Anidita, thank you. Hello, lovely to see you here. Okay, I think it's time we get on. Now we've got a bit of time for people to arrive. I think it's time we get on for the business of the day. So I want to welcome our guest today. And Nikki is Senior Lecturer in Early Modern History at the lovely Chichester University. And if you haven't been to Chichester, I was just doing a little bit of looking up of the place. I've only been once. And it's a really nice part of the country to go. Very close to the Weald and Downland Museum if you want to learn more about sort of everyday Tudor life. So great place to go. Anyway, I divert myself. Nikki is senior lecturer of early modern history there, and her focus is, of course, on women's dynastic and political roles across the late medieval and Tudor period. And she has a fabulous book, which hopefully she's going to be able to show us. It's called Gender, Family and Politics, The Howard Women, 1485 to 1558. So what a fantastic subject. I love the Howard women. They're so fascinating. And if you are interested in purchasing a book, it's in hardback only at the moment. And I do apologise, I couldn't find a link on US Amazon, but there is the link to the UK book below. So do check that out and pick up a copy for yourself. So, okay, well, let's get straight on and let me welcome Nikki. Hi, Nikki.
Hi, lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're most welcome. We've spoken a couple of times before, haven't we, about this subject, but it's ever fascinating to me. So I'm really delighted that you can join us on Tudor Talk today to talk about these amazing folk. So, okay, now, I was just mentioning your book. Perhaps you could just show that to everybody before we get going, just so they can get our eyes on. So that's where we are, Gender, Family and Politics. Yeah, lovely. So I don't have a copy yet, but I was looking at it going, I need this book. So I'm sure there'll be other people out there who feel the same. Okay, let's get stuck in. I'm going to kick off with a couple of questions, folks, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat. And if you have any questions for Nikki, just pop that in the chat there and I will put them to her. So let's start off. I'm always interested to know why people get involved with the topics that they get involved with. So what compelled you particularly to look at the Howard women, Nikki?
Well, the Howard women were the subject of my PhD thesis and of my first book, but I almost stumbled upon them. I knew that I wanted to research women at court at this sort of period. I wrote my MA dissertation on women at Henry VII's court, so in some way this was a natural extension of that. I'm also one of those people who spent their teenage years reading history books and going, yes, but where are all the girls? So I spent my first year of my PhD, I started part-time, and I really spent a lot of that time doing a lot of reading, a lot of research, and the name Howard would just not leave me alone. Every woman with the name Howard that I found was in some way interesting. So then I drew a massive family tree on, I don't know, A3, A2 paper, something like that, that included all the women. And then I put a red dot next to everyone who got executed, sat back and was like, hang on a minute, there's something here. And then I realized that even though two of Henry VIII's wives, Anne Boleyn and Katherine Howard, are Howards or linked to the dynasty, we didn't really know what the rest of the family's women were doing around them. And we tended to assume that they were all acting like one nice, tidy political unit, all kind of pushing for the same goals. And so I thought it would be worth poking that and just seeing if that was really true. And spoiler alert, no, it's not really true.
Well, hopefully we'll unpick some of that with some of the characters that we're going to cover. But I can only imagine what it was like to sit down and do a family tree, because it's a big family, isn't it? And there's so many interconnections at the Tudor court. What struck you immediately when you sat down and did that exercise? I'm curious to know.
That everybody was related. How incestuous the Tudor nobility really was, my lord. But also how many women there were on this family tree that just don't really get much airtime. So I kind of looked at this and thought, well, there's 4 sisters here, each of whom became a countess. Why do we not know about them? And they were where I started, really.
Yeah, good, right. Well, they're fascinating, as we say. So now there will be, we're a well-educated audience here, very well-informed, followers of the Tudor Travel Guide. However, there may be people who are coming to this for the first time, people who are watching on catch-up are going, who on earth are the Tudors? Not the Tudors, the Howards, and why are they so important in Tudor history? So I thought it'd be just useful to just set that scene. Can you answer that for us, Nikki?
Sure. So the Howards, by Henry VIII's reign, by the Tudor period, the Howards are a big deal, but they're also massive parvenus. They're really quite recently a big deal, although they didn't really want you to know that. So they're an East Anglian family, Norfolk and Suffolk, who got their big break in service with Richard III during the Wars of the Roses. which served them quite well, because when the last Duke of Norfolk, who was in the Mowbray family, died without a male heir in 1483, Richard III gave John Howard the Dukedom of Norfolk. And partly because there was a marriage connection between the two families. But that's convenient, because the Dukedom of Norfolk was, and still is, the #1 peerage in England underneath the royal ones. So in one jump, they're at the top of the pile of all of their noble peers. And the Duke of Norfolk was then, and again still is, the Earl Marshal, the person who is responsible for sorting out and presiding over tons of royal ceremonies. Like, he'll deal with all the logistics of coronation and things like that. So you really can't do much at the royal court without a Duke of Norfolk. And of course, then the rest of his family are also elevated by his status. So they become the biggest catches on the marriage market, highest on the list of choices for office, and things like that. But I think that what also makes them so significant in Tudor England is their fertility. What the Howards are really, really, really good at is having kids. Which means there are tons of Howards to take all those offices and spots in the royal household and the best marriages. You cannot move for Howards. I think Hilary Mantel actually has someone essentially say this in her latest, in The Mirror and the Light. She might even make Henry VIII say this. She says, "Why is it that whenever disaster strikes, there's a Howard in the room?" And she is not wrong.
Do you think, I've got 2 questions. The first is, let me ask them both before I forget. First of all,
Sure.
Why did Richard III, it was Thomas Mowbray, right? He elevated, is that right? Did I remember that correctly then?
No, it was John Howard.
John Howard. What did John Howard do to deserve the premier title in England below that of the royalty? That's my first question to you.
He was super loyal, which I think when you're a king who could be described as a usurper, and was at the time, and perhaps isn't super popular, it's quite important to have people around you that you feel like you can trust.
Right. So, yeah.
and to have the premier peerage on your side is probably also not a bad thing, even if it means you've got to give it out yourself.
Yeah. And was he a good military man? Was somebody that Richard could turn to and depend on from a leadership point of view?
Yeah, he was. John Howard eventually died at the Battle of Bosworth. But yeah, he was at the forefront of a lot of these things. And his son as well, Thomas Howard, the second Duke of Norfolk, not the mean one that everyone knows. The second Duke was also, in fact, all the Howard men are really good soldiers.
Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing you said was, that quote from Hilary Mantel, you don't have to look far to see a Howard. Was that by chance? Or was there some correlation in that? And what was it?
I think that, they do have a talent for being in the room every time disaster strikes. I was going to say they have a talent for survival, but I think all of the red dots of executions on my family tree belie that a little bit. Some of them have a really good talent for survival and of getting out of tight spots. I think they probably also have a talent for spotting opportunities and getting the most possible out of them.
Yeah.
So I don't know, what's that? Opportunism?
Yeah, very much so. Opportunism, absolutely. Looking at Howards as a whole, which maybe you've answered this question to a degree already, but were there any kind of familial traits that just ran through, or were they genuinely a very heterogeneous bunch that had different intentions, different loyalties, different characteristics? Can you talk a little bit to that?
I think, as in every family, you do find differences, definitely different loyalties. And the soldier trait for the men is quite a big one. All 3 successive Dukes of Norfolk. You can't have a rebellion without expecting a Duke of Norfolk to show up and crush you quite hard. They're also good on the sea. So there's various admirals who are Howards as well. It's difficult to tell whether their talent for survival or opportunism is partly because they are starting off from a position of such extreme privilege that to compare them with others perhaps is slightly unfair. I do also think that some of the women tended to be on the slightly more outspoken side, and to push boundaries of patriarchy a little bit. I did find that when there was some sort of issue with an opinion to be had, the Howards usually will have an opinion. I didn't often find them in a kind of middle of the road sort of position, unless it was self-consciously and deliberately chosen that way. And it might just be that their prominence made them and their opinions more likely to have left a mark on the historical record.
Right.
But I did definitely feel that they tended to hold opinions kind of hard.
Yes. And did those opinions, were they true? What I'm trying to say is, were they true to their own opinions? Were they authentic in that, even if that put them in a slightly dangerous position? Or would they bend and make their opinions align rather conveniently with that of the current monarch?
There had to be a degree of bend, because if you didn't bend, you'd have your head cut off. So in fact, probably maybe some of them didn't bend quite enough. You can actively see some of them trying to bend. So Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, his kind of, he tries quite hard to be, I suppose, middle of the road, but only because fundamentally he wants to do what the king wants. But he doesn't always like it. So he doesn't like religious reform, for instance. He says, well, I'll never read the scriptures, you know. And I think he comes across a man who married an ex-nun, and he's just absolutely appalled. And yet this is legal according to Henry VIII. So yes, he tries very hard to bend, and he doesn't always succeed.
So we have had a question. Harriet's asked a question. I might need you to elaborate, Harriet, because you've asked what was the marriage connection. I'm just wondering, can you just say a little bit more about that in the comments, and then I'll keep an eye out for that, because I don't know about you, Nikki, but I'm not sure marriage connection to whom or what. Or
I think I know what that means. I think between the Mowbrays and the Howards.
Ah, right.
And now you're going to ask me to remember this off the top of my head, aren't you? Oh God. Oh man, let's think about this, because this is slightly earlier. I've been sat in 1540 for a couple of weeks now, and it's a little earlier than that. Now, is it John Howard who married a Mowbray? I think find out.
I've got a feeling
I think that's
something
right.
Like that. I wrote a little bit about that when I wrote about Framlingham Castle, and I'm sure I remember reading that it came into the Howards' possession when they married into the Mowbray family.
Okay, so John Howard's mother was Margaret Mowbray.
Right. So
and I think she was daughter, sister, some female relative of the last Mowbray, Duke of Norfolk.
Yes.
And so there was sort of nowhere else really for the line to go. Or rather, I think there may have been some other places, but not ones that Richard III was prepared to countenance.
Okay, so hopefully, Harriet, we've answered that question. Thank you. Yes, you did clarify, and it was right. It was between the Mowbrays and the Howards. So thank you for that. Leaf said, is it Leaf? Is that how you say it? Sarah, love the channel. Excellent. We love that. And Susan saying, sorry for getting in late. Well, you know what they say, better late than never. So glad to have you here. Now, we're talking about Howard women. So, Nikki, who is your favourite Howard woman or women, and why?
All of them. Okay, but if I had to pick, my favourite when I wrote about them was Katherine Howard ap Rhys Daubeny, Countess of Bridgewater, who died in 1554. Now, what I tend to do when I talk about women is to give all of their surnames in a line, and when I write them down, they'd be separated by a // just because that way you can see all of a woman's family identities right there on the page. So her natal family, Howard, the family she was born into, and then her marriages, because most women didn't sort of drop one family the minute they marry into another. I mean, nor do people these days. They kind of tend to accumulate families and identities as they go. So yes. Now, Catherine was one of the daughters of Thomas Howard, 2nd Duke of Norfolk, and Agnes Tilney. So she is the half-sister of the 3rd Duke of Norfolk, which makes her also a half-aunt of both Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. And she's one of the ones who held strong opinions and went for it. So over the course of her life, she did things like throw shade at Anne Boleyn, which is a dangerous thing to do. She besieged the governor of Wales in his castle, like you do. She divorced her second husband. She sent troops to join the rebels of the Pilgrimage of Grace. And when it's your half-brother in charge of putting down that rebellion, again, that's an interesting choice. She had a spell in the Tower for misprision of treason over the whole fall of Katherine Howard fiasco. Yeah. And I think none of those were what you would call normal experiences, even for a Tudor noblewoman. And I still have unanswered questions about what she was doing with some of these things. I did recently write an article on her for the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography because she wasn't in it. So now she is.
Excellent.
And all of these things are laid out there.
That's quite a remarkable life and sequence of events to get involved with.
Exactly. It's quite insane. Part of this is due to her marriages.
So say a little bit more about that.
Her first marriage was to a Welshman, Rhys ap Griffith, probably. He is the grandson of Sir Rhys ap Thomas, who fought with Henry VII of Bosworth Field. Anne may have been the person to kill Richard III. I don't know if that's an apocryphal story. It might be. So related to that sort of branch. And I think the Howards were thinking, hang on, the Duke of Suffolk's got quite some influence in Wales. We need to find a way to counter that. Here, have a Howard daughter, you know. So it's a convenient link for them.
And how old was she when she was married for the first time?
Oh, she would have been, I think, in her early 20s. Okay. So not kind of horrendously young.
No, not super young. Sometimes it's nice, it's just to understand, kind of, because
yeah.
Sometimes they are horrendously young, aren't they? And you get a kind of feel for where somebody is in their life story. So, yeah, okay, carry on.
Yeah. I mean, it is difficult to know because we don't know specifically when she was born. But my money would be in the very early 1500s. So, yes, she marries him. She goes to Wales. Powerful granddad, Sir Rhys ap Thomas, dies in 1525. And so grandson thinks quite rationally, great, I'll get all of his officers. I'll pretty much rule South Wales. Henry VIII thinks, no, I don't think so, and puts a royal governor in place. And the two of them just butt heads instantly, and it gets violent, and there's a dagger, and there's an arrest, and Rhys gets imprisoned in the castle in Carmarthen, and then Catherine seems to kind of raise a party of Welshmen to go rescue him, while writing to Cardinal Wolsey going, please help me. Which is, again, an interesting choice. And the quarrel between the two men in Wales just continues to escalate. But Catherine is joining in. So the Spanish ambassador in London is reporting back what he's hearing. And he hears that Catherine has besieged the governor of Wales in his castle. And now Rhys has threatened to finish what she'd begun. So basically, between them, they're causing a ton of trouble in the south of Wales that Henry VIII could really do without. So eventually they make up some story about him trying to join in with the King of Scotland and invade, or something mad. It's like a show trial. And they execute Rhys, her first husband.
Oh, right.
Yeah, not so great.
But
so she's widowed.
Didn't seem to stop her then.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. This is one of the reasons I have questions. But the Spanish ambassador also thought that half the reason that happened was because Rhys and Catherine had been speaking against Anne Boleyn. He doesn't say what they said. I'd love to know what they said.
Oh, yes. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
But even so. So, yes, she's widowed with 3 fairly young children. And she's not.
Do you have any sense what she might have been saying about Anne Boleyn? Was it religious grounds, do you think?
Not so far as I know. I've not found any evidence that Catherine held super strong religious opinions in any specific direction. So I think it's unlikely to be religious. Yeah, it's not clear.
And was she part of Anne's household? Was she part of the ladies in?
No, she was not. She probably will have, like most noble women, popped in from time to time and served what we call in extraordinary. So extraordinary versus ordinary. If you're there every day and you get paid for it, you're in ordinary service. If you just dip in now and again, it's extraordinary. which is a term I kind of love.
Yes.
You are extraordinary today.
That'd be lovely, wouldn't it? So, and she does, as you say, she gets involved with the downfall of Katherine Howard, and
yeah.
Can you remind us how she gets implicated in that? Doesn't she try and cover it all up with Katherine Howard? Tell me.
Yeah, she's one of the ones who knows something about what Catherine had been doing before her marriage to Henry VIII. So Katherine Howard, the Queen, grew up in her grandmother's household. Her grandmother is Agnes Tilney, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, and that's my Catherine's mother. So they're quite closely linked.
Yeah, yeah.
So my Catherine probably knew roughly what was going on. She at one point is supposed to have warned young Catherine, well, if you use that sort, if you do this kind of thing, it'll hurt your beauty. And of course, like the rest of the Howards who knew, didn't spill, because what are you going to say when the king says, I want that one? You don't go, sorry, sire, she's damaged goods, do you? I mean, all you can do is ride the wave and hope to cover it up, I think.
Yeah. But she survived the tower. What was her end? When did she die? Do we know where she's buried? Is there a tomb to see?
She died in 1554. She did leave a will, which took some finding because it is not filed where it ought to be. So it's not quite clear whether the will was ever proved or enacted, but it does exist. She died at Lambeth on the Archbishop of Canterbury's estate, which is very near the Howard's house there, Norfolk House, which is or was opposite the Bishop's Palace. She was buried in St Mary's, Lambeth, which is next door to the Archbishop's Palace and is now the Museum of Garden History. So there's no, or so far as we know anymore, there's no kind of tomb, or there's no brass slab, but we do know it would have been in the Howard Chapel, which the last time I went there was acting as the shop.
Yes.
Which is a bit odd.
They're under odd, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, it's an amazing place. Just a shame that we've lost, because there's kind of quite a few important people there, isn't there? It'd be lovely to have a little bit more.
Most of my girls.
Oh, yeah. Now, there are a couple of comments coming through. So let me, first of all, I'm going to come to you, Barb. I've noted your comment, Analia, and I'll come back to you. But Barb, because Barb is interested in a lady we're both interested in, and that's Mary Howard. I love Mary Howard. I've got such a soft spot for her. Yes, so the question from Barb is, I've wondered why Mary supported her father and not her mother, Elizabeth Stafford, in their family feud. So, first of all, before you answer that question, maybe just a potted, who is Mary Howard and what makes her so interested? And then perhaps we could answer that question for Barb.
Sure. Mary Howard was my second choice for who's most interesting. She is slightly better known than Catherine, so I put Catherine first. Mary Howard is the daughter of Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, and Elizabeth Stafford. She marries Henry Fitzroy, who is Henry VIII's illegitimate son, Duke of Richmond, and so she is then Duchess of Richmond. She makes her debut in service at court with Anne Boleyn in September 1532, when Anne is made Marquess of Pembroke. She's known as the Duchess of Richmond. She's best mates with the King's niece, Margaret Douglas. She helps to compile what's known as the Devonshire Manuscript, which is a manuscript of Tudor poetry. They copied their favourite poems in and wrote banter in the margins.
Amazing.
And she's also religiously on the evangelical side of things, much less conservative than some of the rest of the family.
How did that happen? Do we have any sense of that?
I wish I knew. I think she was probably exposed to some of these ideas, possibly in... there's nothing kind of very specific, but I mean, this is the case with most individuals. They didn't leave us a nice diary saying, on this day, I decided I believed in, I don't know, justification by faith alone, and I stopped believing in transubstantiation. If only it was as clear as that. But I think it's probably during the 1530s, and then we start to see more evidence of that in the 1540s, when she's acting as patroness to some quite important reformers and reformist writers. So John Fox, the martyrologist, wrote the first draft of his Book of Martyrs while in Mary's household in the early 1550s.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that. How interesting. So, to go back to Barb's question then, why Mary supported her father and not her mother, Elizabeth Stafford, in their family feud?
Yeah, this is it's a really sad story actually. Her parents' marriage broke down in the 1530s in a slightly odd parallel alongside Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon's marriage and annulment, which may not be wholly a coincidence. I did write about this in the book. So yes, the marriage breaks down. Her mother Elizabeth isn't happy with her father. Basically, he takes a mistress, Bess Holland. Bess Holland is in service, presumably with Elizabeth, within the Howard household. So yeah, Elizabeth's not keen on that at all.
Mm-hmm.
And while normally it was more normal for women to put up and shut up, Elizabeth does neither. Gets quite loud, quite vocal about it in a way that really shocks everyone around her. Nowadays we would treat this incredibly differently, but back then it's very like, what do you think you're doing? You know, it's embarrassing. Her own family, the Staffords, are embarrassed by this. And she keeps making a scene. She's very loyal to Catherine of Aragon. The rest of the Howards are kind of, well, sad, but Anne Boleyn's our niece, therefore. And yeah, their marriage breaks down. There are accusations of domestic violence. It all gets quite dramatic. And the Duke of Norfolk, eventually, there must be some sort of last straw event that we don't know quite what it was, but around Easter in 1534, he rode down to Kenninghaul, took Elizabeth, took away all her expensive clothes and her jewels, so kind of took away her status as Duchess of Norfolk, I suppose, and then took her to a house in Redbourne in Hertfordshire with a much smaller household, and essentially left her there sort of nominally under, I guess, a form of house arrest. Right. At least she seems to see it that way. And then she spends the rest of the 1530s writing very impassioned letters to Thomas Cromwell, basically asking him to sort this situation out, although it's not always clear quite what she expects him to do. She asks for more money a lot. She wants her jointure. You can't get your jointure unless you're widowed, and she's quite clearly not widowed. So her grasp of the legal situation is perhaps not quite all there. As to why Mary, their daughter, took their father's side and not the mother's, I really think it could be as simple as she knew which side her bread was buttered on. It would be, it would not only be taking her mother's side, but it would sort of be going against probably everything she has been brought up to think is correct and incorrect behaviour. And really to lose her place in society, I suppose. Plus, she is in service with Anne Boleyn, who does not like Elizabeth Stafford, Duchess of Norfolk. They do not get on. So there's a lot of competing loyalties there for Mary. And she may also have thought that perhaps her mother should put up and shut up. We don't know. We don't know what she thought. And there's no evidence that she ever kind of spoke out against her mother or anything like that. So it may simply be that she didn't actively take her mother's side, but that doesn't necessarily mean that she did overtly agree with her father either.
I mean, she was a smart cookie, wasn't she? And perhaps you could tell us a little bit about the what she does and what happens at Kenninghaul when the commissioners ride out following the arrest of her father and brother, because I think she manages that, and it's quite an interesting insight into what's going on in the house at the time.
Yeah, she is. She's very smart in a number of ways. So in 1546, her father and her brother are arrested on charges of high treason that are slightly bizarrely to do with heraldry. So her brother is accused of using royal arms that he has no right to, which frankly is a stupid thing to do when you've got a very paranoid king. And the Duke of Norfolk, it's often argued that the Duke of Norfolk was the real target here, and that there's a party of I suppose they are reformers, although it's not an entirely religious dispute, at court, who would like to get rid of the Duke of Norfolk, really ideally before the king dies and there's a new king, because they'd like control of the new reign. Thank you very much. So they'd like the Howards out the way. They arrest them. The king's commissioners then show up at Kenninghaul to kick the women out, basically, to kick out the rest of the household, to disband the servants, and to inventory the rooms and what's in them. Because, of course, if you are charged with treason, your goods are forfeit to the crown. So they turn up and they tell the women what's going on, and the women are appalled. So Mary is there, her sister-in-law, Frances de Vere, her brother Henry's wife, so she's Countess of Surrey. She's also there and heavily pregnant. Bess Holland, the Duke's mistress, is also there. And that must have been an interesting household. And so, yeah, the women are kind of told what's happened. And Mary sort of, I think she falls to her knees in a kind of Jesus God kind of way, like what is happening here? Are we all going to die? But she's she thinks very fast on her feet. She knows how to roll with this stuff, I guess. And she says, right, I'll tell you anything you want to know. Ask me whatever you like. I'll comply. I'll go along with the investigation. Because to do otherwise really is to be complicit. But when she does give evidence, it's very carefully tailored. So Mary often gets the blame for kind of throwing her brother and her father under the bus. And that's really not what she's doing. She's doing the best she can in a very difficult situation. They clearly already have a certain amount of information. They are trying really to get her to implicate her father, and she seems to have understood that. So it's pretty clear she's not going to be able to save her brother because he's done too many stupid things out loud in public lately, which is unfortunate, but what can you do? But she answers very vaguely about the heraldry that they're both using, which is not wholly believable because anybody in this period is quite specific about what arms they're using. She would have known what was going on. But she's like, well, it might have been this, but I'm not really sure. So she's slightly playing on that, oh, well, I'm just a woman, what would I know? Exactly. So she's very circumspect in what she actually does tell them. And it does work, because although her brother is executed, her father is not. And while he spends the entirety of Edward VI's reign in the Tower of London, which is no mean feat for a man in his 70s, he does survive. So, yeah.
But she never marries again, does she, despite being widowed very early on? And I think that's another very smart move, personally. But can you say...
This also is a slight Howard girl thing. They tend to get widowed and be like, never again.
Never again.
I never marry again.
Because, of course, once they're widowed, widows were allowed a much more freedom, weren't they, to make choices for themselves, particularly if they had the finances to do that.
Yes, if you're a poor widow, you don't have a great situation, really. But if you're a rich widow, cool. Yeah, you've got resources.
Yeah. So anything you want to add about maybe Mary's choice to remain single gal, a widow, after that?
I think it is partly because it's going to be very difficult to go higher than Duchess of Richmond. She spends some time in quite the legal battle with Henry VIII, her father-in-law, who says that because the marriage was unconsummated when her husband died, he doesn't need to pay her any jointure, which is untrue. And she fights this pretty hard, manipulates her father beautifully, who writes to Cromwell and says, well, she keeps weeping and wailing at me to go up to London and sort this out herself. What do you think? Is that a good idea? And she gets her way. She goes up and sues to the king, and he eventually is forced to climb down and pay her some money. So from that point, she has financial resources of a sort, although at the arrests in 1546, the king's commissioners are surprised by how bare her rooms and her coffers are. So it's not quite clear what's happening to all this money. There is an effort to marry her off again, really to solve this, the king having to pay her money situation. It's suggested that she should marry Sir Thomas Seymour, Catherine Parr's later love, because this would neatly sidestep. If she's married off, well, we don't need to worry about her jointure from before, She sees straight through this. They get everyone's agreement, her father's, Thomas Cromwell's, the Seymours, the King's, and the only person who could have prevented this really is Mary, who seems to have turned around and gone, nah, gone back to Norfolk, and left them all going, hang on, what? And she's 17 at this point, so yes, Just stop cooking.
They were a force of nature, weren't they? The Howard women, you know, they knew their own mind. And Lorraine has said, I wouldn't risk a violent husband or dying in childbirth either. So yeah.
There is that. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yes,
Now,
Mary never has any children. She does look after her brother's children after his execution.
I think that's so touching, actually. And am I, if I remember rightly from our previous conversation, because of her evangelical leanings, the next Duke of Norfolk, Henry Howard's son, has an evangelical leaning himself. Is that right? Is that?
I mean, his religious perspectives are a little bit difficult to unravel, because he also takes part in the 1569 rebellion, Catholic rebellion, and he's supposedly going to marry Mary, Queen of Scots. So quite how evangelical he really was,
no, that's obviously
is a bit of a question mark.
No. So I think quite later on, I may have misremembered something there, but no, I think quite later on in life, it's quite clear where his loyalties lie. So I want to come back to Analia. I think that's how you say it, Analia. Please forgive me if I get that wrong. I think we need to talk again about Katherine Howard, because Analia says, talking about Henry's wife, why Lady Rochford was charged with treason if she was helping with the information. So I presume this is the information in relation to Catherine's downfall. So maybe you could answer that.
To be honest, I think while turning King's evidence can get you out of a lot of things, by the time you get to the point of having done the sorts of things that Jane, Lady Rochford, has done, there's really not a lot going to get you out of that, whether or not you tell them everything you know. It's sort of it's crossed a line too far. I think that's the problem.
She's very deeply.
I wish I had a good answer. I need to find one before I write my next book. But I wish I had a good answer for what she thought she was doing in the whole Katherine Howard affair, because she is the one who helps to arrange liaisons for Katherine Howard and Thomas Culpeper and find spaces that they can meet in. I have no good answer for what her involvement is all about. I really don't. Not without resorting to kind of wild speculation that, as a historian, kind of makes me nervous.
Well, I think we're going to hear a little bit more about your latest project at the end of our chat, so we may come back to that. So I'm just keeping an eye on the time. My goodness me, it's like 5:45 already. So if you've got any more questions, folks out there, do make sure to post them so we have time to fit those in. We're going to start wrapping things up in sort of 5 or 10 minutes time, so I'll keep an eye out on the chat. But let me ask you this then. Which Howard woman would you most like to meet, Nikki, and why would that be? And what would you ask them?
My girl Catherine, Countess of Bridgewater. I'd like to know what happened with their second husband, Henry Daubeny, whether she did get a church court divorce or whether Cromwell mediated, and just what was going on there, because it's quite murky. And the other one actually is Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford. She's really only a Howard by kind of faint association. She married George Boleyn, whose mother is a Howard. So she's part of the kind of the much broader Howard dynasty. But I really like to know what she thought she was doing with the Catherine Howard thing.
Yeah.
Or would I ask Mary Howard Fitzroy what she said when she was questioned about Anne Boleyn's behaviour? Maybe I'd do that.
Oh, right. So, yeah, well, I mean, and also I'm just wondering, actually, going back to your favourite person, Catherine, what kind of character, what if you sat down with her, what kind of person would you be faced with, do you think?
It's hard to tell, isn't it? I think someone who didn't suffer fools, probably. And I think as well, Catherine's probably not as much of a courtier, as good as dissimulation as perhaps Mary. And I think that she had less experience at that. So I think she's probably fairly fiery, which you could say is a Howard trait, I suppose. I think she doesn't get on with her brother, the third Duke of Norfolk, we think.
No. I think fiery characters all round, I think, really. And thank you to Deb for purchasing a super sticker. Thank you so much. I'm not quite sure about your you might have to elaborate, Deb. You said pair character flying in the air with a red cape and a smile on his face. I'm not sure what that means. So, Debbie, if you've got a question, please do post it there, and I'd love to put that to Nikki. But thank you so much for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it. For those of you who don't know, I have a membership channel, and if you were to look on my homepage, you will be able to see the join button and see the couple of levels of subscription that you can apply for, and there are all sorts of perks, etc. So that's what Debbie's involved with. Thank you so much to all of those who do support the channel. So now let's talk about properties and artifacts. You probably know because I contacted you on Twitter to say, where's Kenninghaul? Yes. I went to Suffolk on holiday, and and then travelled into Norfolk. It's one of the few properties in the East Anglia area I hadn't been to, and I was determined to find Kenninghaul. But I have to say, it eluded me completely. And there's nothing left there now, but, it just made me smile. And I was thinking of you and thinking of our chats about Kenninghaul when I failed abysmally to find it. I think apparently the owners are not very friendly to visitors just pitching up.
Oh, right.
Yeah, apparently.
Yes, I've never tried to find Kenninghaul just because there's so little remaining. I think it was the third Duke's favourite place, though. So, again, yeah, all the girls would have spent some time there. Okay. And we do have some surviving inventories. So we do know that, for instance, it's a huge letter H, the shape. Yeah. And it has its own tennis court. So someone was copying Henry VIII.
They were. Oh, it would have been an amazing place. But yes, I do say to anybody out there, if you want to go and visit Kenninghaul, it's tough. Apparently it's not in Kenninghaul, which I expected it to be, which is a village. It's outside and it's down some long private track. And as I say, I don't think the owners are very history minded. But on that point, anyway, moving on, any other properties or locations we could go to get closer to the Howard women? You've maybe mentioned Lambeth Church already, but where else would you point us towards?
Framlingham Castle.
Of course.
Is that in Norfolk or Suffolk? It's sort of right on the border. I think it's Suffolk.
No, it's Suffolk. Suffolk. It is Suffolk.
Made famous by Ed Sheeran. Castle on the Hill is about Framlingham Castle. It is mostly inside. It's mostly ruined, but there is a good curtain wall. I think it's an English heritage property, so it is visitable. And you can still see some of the Tudor chimneys that John Howard, the first Duke of Norfolk, put there in the 1480s.
Yeah.
So there's that. Norfolk House in Lambeth was their London house, but unfortunately it is now underneath a Novotel. It would have been opposite the Archbishop's Palace and across the river from Westminster, so quite handy. But yes, the church is still there as the Museum of Garden History.
Yeah, and speaking of churches and Framlingham, of course, you've got the Howard Tomb.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
And you've written about the tombs, haven't you? I was noticing.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit maybe about the tombs and why we should go and see them.
The tombs are really cool. The ones in Framlingham particularly beautiful. So yes, burial sites, I think for a lot of noble families, just became quite fraught in the early 16th century because largely because of the dissolution of the monasteries. A lot of noble families liked to be buried in particular monasteries. Often their ancestors had founded said monastery, so they had a big vault there. But unfortunately, if you're going to dissolve the monasteries, you need to find somewhere else to bury your dead. And then you have choices, don't you? So do you move the people who are already there? Or do you just kind of leave them be and start off a new mausoleum somewhere else? And different families made different choices. But the Howards, I think there's a slight tug of war going on because Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, would like to make Framlingham the new place. He's buried there, along with his first wife, Anne. And Henry, Earl of Surrey, is also buried there. And Mary Fitzroy is buried there as well.
Yeah.
But the Howard Chapel in St Mary's, Lambeth, is another prime burial site. And at that time, Agnes, Dowager Duchess of Norfolk, sort of creates a whole new dynastic story around the 2nd Duke. She moves her dead husband, the 2nd Duke of Norfolk, from Thetford to Lambeth and sort of sets up a whole new family mausoleum there. So you've kind of got two competing ones going on. A lot of the girls end up buried in Lambeth. There's a kind of weird thing for women being buried in the 16th century as well. A lot of them who outlived their husbands, if their husbands had been buried in a monastery, they couldn't now join their husbands there when they died. So you've got quite a lot of kind of floating aristocratic wives. I think there's an argument that this is why there's so many of them end up in Westminster.
Oh, okay, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And actually, since we're talking about that subject and we're talking about Lambeth, Marcia's asked about Elizabeth Boleyn, of course, who's also buried in Lambeth.
Yeah.
Marcia said, and we've certainly got time to just squeeze in, this is probably going to be one of our last questions, but can you comment on Elizabeth Boleyn? I feel like I don't have a clear picture of her place in the events surrounding her daughter's rise and fall.
Yeah, that's quite a difficult one. Elizabeth Boleyn is interesting. She is a Howard. She is, marries Thomas Boleyn quite early on, mother of Anne Boleyn. She's definitely there, is sometimes almost the best that you can say. She's there. She's an experienced courtier. She's been around a long time. But that in itself may be why we don't have a huge amount of information about her. Because she's very good at slipping under the radar, which is quite a valuable skill for women in Henry's court. So she's definitely there. She acts as, I suppose, a kind of chaperone on some occasions. So sometimes you'll see an ambassador refer to some conversation between Anne and Henry and say that Elizabeth Boleyn had been there. She's there at the coronation. So yes, she's around. She's probably questioned along with the rest of the women when Anne is arrested, because there's no way that they're not going to be questioned. We just don't have what they said. We don't have their depositions. And after that, she really sort of fades out of the record, and she dies. I think it's 1538 that she dies, so quite soon afterwards, and she's buried in Lambeth. My Catherine, Countess of Bridgewater, is the chief mourner at her funeral.
Ah, right. Okay. Yeah. So remind me what their relationship are. They half sisters?
Oh, God. Do you know, they are half sisters. They are, but Elizabeth Boleyn would have been considerably older.
Yes.
Because the second Duke has 2 marriages. Yeah.
Because Elizabeth Boleyn was one of the eldest, wasn't she? I think she was the eldest daughter, and then it just, there was another marriage, and it's just like, oh, there's so many of them. But yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Marcia. It's for a long, long time. I didn't even realise Elizabeth Howard existed, because you hardly hear a thing about her. It's awfully frustrating, isn't it? So you don't get any snapshot of really what she felt about Anne's rise or her fall, which is just
Yeah, I mean, she's probably, I suppose you could speculate and say she's probably quite attractive. I mean, there are rumours, when Henry is involved with Anne Boleyn, there were rumours that Elizabeth, the mother, had once been his mistress as well. And I mean, it's almost certainly rubbish. But for people to have thought that believable, she must have been kind of hot,
Yeah, wonderful. Now you mentioned actually one artifact associated with the Howard women. That's a Devonshire manuscript.
Oh yeah.
You might want to tell us a little bit more about that. Can people see it at all, or is it really only if you're doing academic study, or are there any other artifacts that are associated with any of the Howard women?
In terms of other artifacts, unfortunately, no. Apart from, there's a portrait, a Holbein pencil sketch of Mary Howard, which is the picture that's on the front of my book. Otherwise, no. The Devonshire manuscript lives in the British Library. To see the real thing in person, I think you do need to have quite a high kind of, I don't know, reason to need to do it. I've never seen it in person, but you can get it online. They have digitized it. I think it's a wiki book. Okay. So you can see the original images. You can see transcription in original spelling and then sort of put into modern day English. And there's some commentary on there as well. And that's really cool. So you can sort of see it digitally.
And you said that there was Mary Howard involved in that. Margaret Douglas. Who were the other? Because there was a little circle of them, wasn't there? Really kind of.
Mary Shelton. Mary Shelton is the other woman who's involved, and the Sheltons again are Boleyn relatives, so it's all again quite incestuous.
All in the family.
They're the main women. There's a whole host of men as well. So Mary's brother Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey, sometimes known as the Poet Earl, because guess what? He wrote poetry. He was quite good at it. He wrote stuff in there. Thomas Wyatt is supposed to have done so as well. Sort of that whole little court circle, like the bright young things of the 1530s.
Lovely, lovely. So that's the Devonshire Manuscript, folks, and it's a wiki book, you said. So maybe if you plug that into Google, you'll be able to find it from there. If I find the link, I'll put it in the description below this video if you're watching this on catch up. So that's wonderful. Now, we've just had Aries Rainbow Child comment. It's weird that we don't have Anne Boleyn's birthday, but I guess that was quite common, wasn't it, with the women? We didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not all that uncommon at all. It's not the law to record baptisms in a church, sort of register a church account until 1540. So before then, it's sort of luck, if we know, particularly for girls.
Yeah, really frustrating. So anyway, we've only got 5 minutes left, so let's wrap up by hearing what you're up to at the moment and what's your next project, Nikki.
I'm currently mired in the research for my next book, which is on the ladies in waiting who served Henry VIII's wives. Just because there sort of isn't a book like this, which I found odd. When I wrote my first book about the Howard women, I wrote a chapter on the Howard women as courtiers, and I wanted to put them into context. And I found that the context actually wasn't really there in the form that I wanted it to be. So I thought, well, hey, next project. So that's what we're doing.
What will we understand at the end of that, do you think, or do you hope?
I hope we'll know more about what it's like to be in service at court as a woman. Because as a noble woman or a woman of gentry or noble class, you're already kind of a bit special. But to be certainly in ordinary service at court is like another kind of level on top of that. And it's such a unique, weird, slightly boarding school kind of experience. Yeah. And you're privy to so many extraordinary events. And you've also got so many competing loyalties pulling at you. So you've taken an oath of service to the Queen, but nominally you've also got to serve the King. And then what if those interests diverge? What if your family want you to do something else? What if you're married and you have more than one family and they all want you to do different things? And what if actually what you want to do is something different again? So they're kind of negotiating a really difficult path.
Interesting. Well, I for one can't wait. I hope, and I'm sure those folk out there watching will feel similar about that. That sounds great. So so I think it's time that we pull this together. I can't believe an hour has gone by already. It all flies by. But I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, Nikki. It's been a pleasure to chat Howard Women with you as ever. And so hopefully we will speak again when your next book, I think you're saying maybe 2023. So we've got a bit of a wait, but hopefully we'll see you again. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great.
Okay, folks, so that was Nikki Clarke, and wasn't that great? Gosh, the Howard women, fantastic, so much. And I do urge you to, if you are interested, of course, in women at court and the Howard women, do have a look for that link in the description below, and you can pick up a copy of her book. And I saw Leaf, you were saying, I'll get my library to order the book so others can read them. So great, thank you. Good, so now I just want to, before we close out, I just wanted to just say a couple of things. First of all, and most importantly, is that Tudor Talk, this monthly live chat, will be taking a holiday in August, because just like the Tudors, I head off on the road, hit the road, go on progress. I'm going to collect lots of content. Where am I going? I'm going all over the place. Sutton House in London, home of Sir Ralph Sadler. I'll be on the battlefield, Stoke battlefield, and having a tour there. I'm going to be at the Mary Rose Museum. I'm going to be up in Lincoln, Pontefract. I'm going to be all over the place. So with that in mind, as I said before at the top of this video, if you want to follow my adventures and find out where I'm going and see what's coming your way, do either grab the QR code and follow me on Instagram, or just search for me on Instagram, the Tudor Travel Guide, and you'll be able to see all the things that I am up to. Okay, the other final thing I will, and folks, I will be back in September. So hopefully I'll be joined by Susanna Lipscomb. who is going to, I hope, be taking part in my virtual summit, which will be coming up in September. So just keep an eye out for that, my annual virtual summit, which is always a bit of a highlight of the year. We've got some fantastic contributors already recorded their interviews and chats and video lectures with us. So look out for that. Now, the final thing, I've just one request, and I am looking for people to help me develop and shape the future of the Tudor Travel Guide. So I have a very specific request. If you're watching this video and you are a lady between 40 and 65, and you would like to chat to me and help me, give me some feedback, chat to me about where we go with the Tudor Travel Guide, the kind of things I do and the kind of things I shape and develop, then I'd love to hear from you. So if that's you, drop me an email at sarah@thetudortravelguide.com, or you can just DM me on Facebook. I'd love to hear from you. I've created a private Facebook group where we can then talk a little bit more. So anyway, with that, it's 6:01, folks. I'm going to be watching the England game tonight in a couple of hours. I don't know whether any of you out there are interested in the footy, but if you are, come on, England. But anyway, it's been a delight to see you all here, and I look forward to seeing you all in September. Okay, wherever you are in the world. Good morning, good evening, or good afternoon, and see you soon. Bye bye.